Roll the window down all the way. ID. Now.
I'm on a public easement. Am I being detained for a crime?
You're parked by critical infrastructure. That's suspicious.
Suspicion isn't a crime. Am I free to leave?
Last chance. Show me your ID or I pull you out.
I do not consent. This stop is unlawful and it's all on camera.
The high-definition dash cam mounted behind the rearview mirror was recording in 4K resolution, capturing every grain of dust floating in the stagnant heat of the midday sun. And Deputy Kyle Brannigan had absolutely no idea that the man he was about to drag out of the vehicle was a senior field auditor for the Department of Homeland Security, actively conducting a vulnerability assessment on critical infrastructure. The man sitting in the driver's seat of the nondescript gray sedan wasn't nervous. He wasn't hiding drugs. He wasn't casing the electrical substation for copper wire. He was Marcus Thorne, a 55-year-old veteran of federal service who had spent the last decade auditing the physical security of the nation's power grid. He had written the protocols for substation defense. He had briefed congressional committees on domestic terror threats. And now he was about to become the victim in a civil rights violation that would bankrupt a rural county and expose a department's rot. Before we get into the details of this infuriating encounter, I need you to do something for me. Go to the comments section right now and tell me, do you think citizens should have to show ID just because an officer asks type yes or no? If you believe the Constitution still matters in this country, hit that subscribe button. You are not going to believe how this officer tries to justify what he does next. Marcus Thorne was a man of precision. Dressed in a pressed button-down shirt and slacks, he looked every bit the government official, though his rental car, a generic mid-sized sedan with out-of-state plates, didn't scream Fed. He was parked on the gravel shoulder of a public utility road roughly 50 yards from the perimeter fence of the Jefferson County step-down substation. He was taking notes on his tablet documenting the lack of signage and the overgrown vegetation that obscured the warning placards' clear violations of federal safety guidelines. He wasn't trespassing. He wasn't impeding traffic. He was doing a job that kept the lights on for 3 states. It was 1:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The sun was high, the sky was clear, and visibility was perfect. Thorne saw the dust cloud before he saw the cruiser. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Department vehicle came tearing down the access road, kicking up gravel, clearly exceeding the safe speed limit for the terrain. Thorne didn't flinch. He simply adjusted the angle of his internal dash cam and placed his hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. The cruiser didn't just pull up behind him. It aggressively swung around and parked at a 45-degree angle across the front bumper of Thorne's car, effectively boxing him in. This was a tactical maneuver usually reserved for high-risk felony stops or active pursuits, not for a parked vehicle on a country road. Deputy Kyle Brannigan stepped out. He was 29 years old with a buzz cut that was a little too short and a uniform that was a little too tight. He had been on the force for 4 years, and in that time he had developed a reputation for being proactive, which was department code for harassing out-of-towners. He adjusted his duty belt, rested his hand on the grip of his sidearm, and approached the driver's side window. He wasn't wearing a hat, but he was wearing wraparound sunglasses that hid his eyes. Thorne watched him come. He rolled his window down halfway enough to communicate, but not enough to allow the officer to reach inside. He kept his hands visible. He knew exactly how this played out. He had seen the statistics. A black man, a white cop, a rural road, and no witnesses, except the silent, unblinking eye of the camera lens. "Driver, roll the window all the way down," Brannigan barked, stopping just behind the B-pillar, a tactical position designed to keep him out of the driver's line of sight. "I can hear you fine, deputy," Thorne said. His voice was a deep baritone, steady and devoid of fear. It was the voice of a man who had given orders to people far more important than a county deputy. "I said roll it down and turn the car off. The engine is off, deputy. The keys are on the dashboard. How can I help you?" Brannigan didn't like the tone. It was too calm, too educated. It lacked the subservience he felt he was owed. He leaned in closer, his reflection visible in the glass. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Copper theft, sabotage. You're parked right next to a critical facility. I am parked on a public easement, deputy. Thorne corrected gently. I am not impeding traffic and I am not trespassing. Is there a crime you are investigating? You're the investigation, Brannigan snapped. Let me see your license registration and proof of insurance. Thorne didn't move toward his glove box. He didn't reach for his wallet. He kept his hands perfectly still on the wheel, fingers spread. He knew the law better than the man standing with a hand on his gun. He knew Terry v. Ohio. He knew Delaware v. Prowse. He knew that without reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime had been committed, was being committed, or was about to be committed, this demand for identification was unlawful. Deputy Thorne set his eyes fixed on the windshield. I am under no legal obligation to identify myself unless you can articulate a specific crime I am suspected of committing. Suspicious activity is not a crime. It is a hunch. And the Supreme Court has ruled that a hunch is not sufficient grounds for a detention. Brannigan froze. The script in his head had just been shredded. People didn't quote Supreme Court case law to him. They stammered, they apologized, or they got angry. They didn't give him a lecture on constitutional jurisprudence. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, Brannigan said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to summon an authority he was rapidly losing. You are in a high-security area. You fit the description of individuals known to case these locations. Now give me your ID or I'm going to drag you out of that car. What description is that, deputy? Thorne asked, finally turning his head slightly to look at the officer through the glass. Specifically, is there a bolo out for a middle-aged man in a rental sedan wearing a Brooks Brothers shirt? Or is the description just black male in a car? Don't play games with me, Brannigan spat. I have the authority to identify anyone I reasonably suspect is up to no good. You're sitting here taking pictures of a power station. That's a potential act of terrorism. Photography from a public vantage point is a First Amendment protected activity, Thorne replied, citing Glick v. Cuniff without missing a beat. If you are detaining me, I require you to state the specific statute I have violated. If you are not detaining me, I am free to go. Which is it? Brannigan's face flushed a deep crimson visible even in the bright sunlight. He was losing control of the encounter, and for a man like Brannigan, loss of control felt like a physical attack. He stepped back and keyed his radio, but he didn't walk away to the cruiser. He wanted Thorne to hear him. He wanted to intimidate him. Dispatch, I've got a 1055 at the substation on County Road 9. Subject is non-compliant, refusing to identify. Possible 1096. Brannigan said, using the code for a mental subject. Send backup. Thorne shook his head slightly. 1096, really, deputy? Asserting my rights does not make me mentally unstable. It makes me a citizen. Step out of the vehicle, Brannigan ordered, moving his hand to the handle of the door. Now, I am not consenting to this search or seizure, Thorne said, clearly speaking as much to the dashcam as to the officer. I am complying only under the threat of physical force. I am reaching with my left hand to unbuckle my seatbelt. I am not armed. Get out! Brannigan yanked the door handle. It was locked. He pounded on the window with the heel of his hand. Unlock the door, or I will break the glass. Thorne unlocked the door. He wasn't going to let this escalate to broken glass if he could help it. He opened the door slowly and stepped out, rising to his full height. He was 6'2", taller than Brannigan by 3 inches. He stood calmly, hands at his sides, not aggressive, but solid as a rock. Turn around. Hands on the car, Brannigan shouted, grabbing Thorne's shoulder and spinning him around. The force was unnecessary. Thorne wasn't resisting. He wasn't pulling away. He was allowing himself to be manhandled, because he knew that every shove, every aggressive touch was adding zeros to the settlement check the county would eventually write. I am not resisting, Thorne stated firmly. I am submitting to your authority under protest. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure." "Shut up," Brannigan hissed, kicking Thorne's legs apart to spread his stance wider. "You want to be a lawyer? You can be a lawyer in a holding cell." The parking lot was silent except for the wind in the power lines and the heavy breathing of the young deputy. Brannigan patted Thorne down aggressively, checking for weapons. He found nothing but a cell phone and a wallet in the back pocket. He didn't pull the wallet out yet. He was too focused on the cuffs. "You're under arrest," Brannigan said, pulling his handcuffs from his belt. "For what charge?" Thorne asked, his cheek pressed against the hot metal of the car roof. "Obstruction of justice, failure to identify, resisting an officer." "I haven't resisted, and failure to identify is a secondary charge in this state. You need a primary offense. You still haven't named one." "Disorderly conduct." Brannigan improvised, snapping the cuffs onto Thorne's wrists. The metal bit into the skin tight. Too tight. "You're creating a disturbance." "We are alone on a dirt road, deputy," Thorne said quietly. "Who exactly am I disturbing?" The situation had now crossed the line from a bad stop to a criminal deprivation of rights under color of law. Brannigan, fueled by adrenaline and the belief that he had just caught a sovereign citizen or a domestic terrorist, was past the point of reasoning. He walked Thorne to the back of the patrol car. "Watch your head," Brannigan said mockingly, pushing Thorne's head down as he shoved him into the cramped back seat of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat was uncomfortable, designed to punish, not transport. The cage partition smelled of stale sweat and industrial cleaner. Thorne shifted his weight to alleviate the pressure on his shoulders. He looked through the wire mesh. "Deputy, I am informing you that my vehicle contains sensitive government property. You do not have consent to search it." "I don't need your consent." Brannigan laughed, walking back toward Thorne's sedan. "I'm towing it. Inventory search. Standard procedure. Whatever's in there, I'm going to find it." This was another lie, or at least a gross misapplication of the law. An inventory search could not be used as a pretext for an investigative search. Brannigan was digging his grave deeper with every sentence. Thorne watched from the back of the cruiser as Brannigan approached his rental car. Have you ever seen an officer invent a reason to search a car just because they were angry? It happens more often than you think. If you're watching this and you think the police should be held to the same laws they enforce, leave a comment saying accountability. Brannigan opened the driver's door of Thorne's car and began to rummage. He threw papers from the passenger seat onto the floor. He opened the center console, tossing out charging cables and a bottle of hand sanitizer. He was looking for something, anything, to justify the arrest. A joint, a weapon, a stolen credit card. He found nothing in the front. He popped the trunk. Thorne watched as the trunk lid flew up. Inside, anchored to the frame, was a large black Pelican hard case. It was heavy-duty waterproof and secured with 2 commercial-grade padlocks. Next to it was a folded reflective vest with bold lettering on the back, currently face down, and a hard hat. Brannigan whistled. "Jackpot," he muttered loud enough for his body cam to pick up. He reached for the Pelican case. It was heavy. He tugged at the locks. "What do we have here? Burglary tools, copper wire cutters?" He walked back to the cruiser, leaving the trunk open. He leaned into the window. "What's in the box, tough guy? You got cutters in there? Explosives?" "That is a secure container," Thorne said. "It contains federal property. If you attempt to open it without a warrant or proper clearance, you will be violating federal law on top of the civil rights violations you've already committed." "Federal property?" Brannigan scoffed. "Yeah, sure. And I'm the director of the FBI. You're just a thief with a fancy toolbox." Brannigan returned to the trunk. He took out his collapsible baton. He wasn't supposed to pry locks open, but he was angry, and he was convinced he had found a bomb or evidence of a massive theft ring. He wedged the tip of the baton into the hasp of the lock and leveraged his weight against it. Thorne closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't praying. He was memorizing. Time 1:22 p.m. Location County Road 9. Officer attempts forced entry into DHS equipment case level 4. The lock didn't break. Brannigan cursed and kicked the bumper of the rental car. He grabbed the reflective vest and whipped it open. The bright yellow mesh unfurled. On the back, in large reflective silver letters, it read, DHS, Federal Auditor. Brannigan stared at the vest for a full 5 seconds. He blinked. He looked at the Pelican case again. He looked back at the cruiser where Thorne sat silently. For a smart man, Brannigan was incredibly dense. Fake, he muttered to himself. Guy bought a costume online, trying to impersonate a Fed to cover up the theft. It was a cognitive dissonance survival mechanism. If the vest was real, Brannigan was in trouble. Therefore, the vest had to be fake. He threw the vest back into the trunk, slammed the lid shut, and walked back to his patrol car. He got in the front seat, his breathing heavy. You really committed to the bit, didn't you? Brannigan said, glancing at Thorne in the rearview mirror. Got the vest and everything. Impersonating a federal officer is a felony, you know. I'm adding that to the list. Thorne didn't respond. There was nothing left to say to Deputy Brannigan. The time for talking was over. The time for litigation had begun. The backup Brannigan had called for never arrived. Rural counties were spread thin, and the nearest unit was 20 minutes out. Brannigan decided to transport the prisoner himself. He put the car in drive and peeled out, turning back onto the main highway toward the county seat. The drive took 30 minutes. For most of it, Brannigan lectured Thorne. It was a nervous, rambling monologue designed to reassure himself that he was doing the right thing. You come into my town, act suspicious, refuse to cooperate. What do you expect? Brannigan said, eyes scanning the road. We have folks out here trying to steal infrastructure. I have a duty to protect this community. If you had just shown me your ID, we would have been done in 2 minutes. But no, you had to be the smart guy. Thorne sat perfectly still. He was cataloging the pain in his wrists, the numbness in his fingers, and the specifics of the conversation. He knew that the interior camera of the patrol car was recording audio and video. Every word Brannigan spoke was a nail in his own professional coffin. You know, guys like you are the problem, Brannigan continued. You think the rules don't apply to you. You think you can just walk around doing whatever you want without answering to authority. Well, today you learned a lesson. Respect goes a long way. The law applies to everyone, Deputy, Thorne said, breaking his silence, including you. Save it, Brannigan snapped. They arrived at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Station, a squat brick building that had seen better days. Brannigan pulled into the Sallyport, the garage door rattling shut behind them. He hauled Thorne out of the car, gripping his arm tightly. Let's go, don't trip. He marched Thorne through the heavy steel doors and into the booking area. It was a stark room with fluorescent lights and a high counter. Behind the counter sat Sergeant Miller. Miller was 61 years old with gray hair and a face lined by 30 years of police work. He was the kind of officer who had seen it all and did everything by the book because he was too close to retirement to deal with lawsuits. He looked up over his reading glasses as Brannigan dragged Thorne in. What do we have here, Kyle? Miller asked, his voice gravelly. Interfering, resisting, disorderly conduct. Brannigan recited, puffed up with pride. Caught him casing the substation out on County Road 9. Refused to ID. Had a bunch of gear in his trunk. Impersonating a Fed, too. Had a fake DHS vest. Miller looked at Thorne. He saw the expensive clothes, the calm demeanor, the lack of struggle. He saw a man who didn't look like a cop or thief. He saw a man who looked like he was waiting for a board meeting to start. Impersonating, huh? Miller said slowly. He pointed to the counter. Empty his pockets. Brannigan reached into Thorne's back pocket and pulled out the wallet. He tossed it onto the counter with a thud. Check it yourself, Sarge. Probably a fake ID in there to match the vest. Miller picked up the wallet. It was high-quality black leather. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the California driver's license. Marcus Elias Thorne. Valid. He flipped the flap. Inside was a gold badge. Not a security guard badge. A heavy, intricate federal shield. Below it was a credentials card with a holographic seal that shifted in the light. It read, United States Department of Homeland Security, Office of Inspector General. Name, Marcus Thorne. Title, Senior Field Auditor. Clearance level, Top Secret SCI. Miller froze. The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. He looked at the credentials. He looked at the badge. He looked at the holographic seal again. He had seen fakes before. This was not a fake. The lamination had the specific tactile micro-printing that was impossible to replicate. Miller looked up at Brannigan, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and horror. "Kyle," Miller said, his voice very quiet. "Did you read him his rights?" "I was gonna do it after processing." "Why?" Miller looked at Thorne. "Sir, are you armed?" "No, Sergeant," Thorne replied calmly. "My firearm is secured in a lockbox at my hotel. I am currently unarmed." Miller closed the wallet slowly and set it down on the counter as if it were made of nitroglycerin. He looked at Brannigan. "Take the cuffs off, now." "What? Why?" Brannigan was confused. "Sarge, he's a suspect. He's impersonating—" "He is not impersonating anyone, you idiot," Miller roared, slamming his hand on the counter. "He's a federal agent. Get those cuffs off him before you cost us the entire budget for the next 10 years. The color drained from Deputy Brannigan's face. It didn't happen gradually. It was instant, like a light switch flipping off. He looked from Miller to Thorne, then down at the wallet on the counter. That's real," Brannigan stammered. "Unlock him," Miller shouted. Brannigan fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the key into the hole. Thorne stood there, patiently waiting. Finally, Miller came around the counter, snatched the keys from Brannigan's trembling hand, and unlocked the cuffs himself. "Mr. Thorne," Miller said, his tone shifting to one of professional deference and deep concern. "I apologize. I need to secure your wrists." He checked Thorne's wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had dug in. "Do you require medical attention?" "I'll document the injuries later," Thorne said, rubbing his wrists. "Right now I need my phone. I need to make a call to the Washington, D.C. field office." "Of course," Miller said. He handed Thorne his phone immediately. "Sarge, Brannigan started, his voice a whisper. "He refused to identify. He was acting suspicious." "Get in the captain's office," Miller ordered, not even looking at him. "Sit down, shut up, and don't touch anything. If you say one more word, I will arrest you myself for stupidity." Brannigan walked into the office like a dead man walking. Thorne unlocked his phone. He didn't look at Miller. He dialed a number from memory. He put it on speaker so Miller could hear. "OIG Dispatch, Agent Reynolds speaking." "Reynolds, this is Thorne. ID Alpha 70. I've been unlawfully detained by the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. I was interfered with during a critical infrastructure audit. Equipment secured and vehicle possibly compromised. I need a liaison officer on site." "Copy that, sir. Are you in immediate danger?" "Negative. I am in the booking room. The sergeant is cooperative. The arresting officer is pending." "Understood. We're notifying the local FBI field office now. ETA for agents is 45 minutes. Do not answer any questions until legal arrives." "Understood." Thorne hung up. Miller wiped sweat from his forehead. He picked up the desk phone and dialed the sheriff's private cell number. "Sheriff, it's Miller. You need to come in. Now." "I'm at lunch, Miller. Can it wait?" "No, sir. Deputy Brannigan just arrested a Homeland Security auditor for parking near the substation. The FBI is on the way." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then a string of expletives that would have peeled the paint off the walls. "I'm 5 minutes out," the sheriff said. The line went dead. Thorne looked at Miller. I want my vehicle secured. Nobody touches it until my team arrives. If that Pelican case is opened, this becomes a national security incident. I'll put a deputy on it right now, Miller promised. Nobody goes near it. Thorne sat on the bench in the booking area. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just waited. He was thinking about the young deputy in the office. He wasn't angry at the boy personally. He was angry at the system that trained him. Brannigan was a symptom. The badge was just a piece of metal. It was the man behind it that gave it honor or shame. Today, Brannigan had brought shame. Sheriff Tom Reynolds burst through the station doors 6 minutes later. He was a big man, usually jovial, but today his face was thunderous. He ignored Miller and went straight to Thorne. "Agent Thorne," Reynolds said, extending a hand. "I'm Sheriff Reynolds. I am incredibly sorry for this misunderstanding." Thorne didn't shake the hand. He looked at it, then looked up at Reynolds' face. "This wasn't a misunderstanding, Sheriff. It was a violation of constitutional rights and federal law. Your deputy detained me without reasonable suspicion, arrested me for asserting my Fourth Amendment rights, and attempted an illegal search of government property." Reynolds pulled his hand back. "I understand you're upset. We can sort this out. I'm sure Deputy Brannigan is a liability," Thorne cut in. "I want his body cam footage secured immediately. I want the dash cam footage from his cruiser. And I want the logs of his radio traffic. My legal team will be filing a preservation letter within the hour." "We will cooperate fully," Reynolds said, realizing this wasn't going to be fixed with a handshake. "Where is he?" "In the office," Miller said. Reynolds stormed into the office. Through the glass, Thorne watched the sheriff scream at Brannigan. He couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. Brannigan was shrinking into his chair. He looked like a child being scolded by a disappointed father. 30 minutes later, 2 black SUVs pulled into the lot. 4 agents in suits walked in. They were FBI. They didn't look happy. They spoke briefly with Thorne, then took custody of the situation. They retrieved the recordings. They interviewed Miller. They took a statement from Thorne. They didn't interview Brannigan. They didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. Thorne was released 3 hours after his arrest. He walked out of the station, his wrists bruised, his suit wrinkled, but his dignity intact. He walked to his rental car, which had been returned to the station lot. He checked the trunk. The Pelican case was still locked. The seals were unbroken. He drove away. But he wasn't done with Jefferson County. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later. It didn't just name Brannigan. It named the sheriff and the county. It alleged unlawful seizure, false arrest, excessive force, and a failure to train. During the discovery phase, Thorne's lawyers requested Brannigan's disciplinary history. What they found was a pattern. Over his 4 years, Brannigan had stopped dozens of out-of-state drivers. In almost every case, the driver was black or Hispanic. In almost every case, the probable cause was vague swerving, suspicious behavior, nervousness. Brannigan was a predator with a badge. He targeted people he thought wouldn't fight back. He targeted people who didn't live in the town, people who would just pay the ticket and move on. He never expected to pull over a man who audited federal security for a living. The dashcam video was released to the public as part of the legal proceedings. It went viral overnight. Millions of people watched Brannigan demand papers without cause. They watched him escalate. They watched him lie about the resisting. They watched him try to break into the trunk. The comments section was a firestorm. "He messed with the wrong one," people wrote. "This is why we need reform." Imagine if he wasn't a Fed, he'd be in jail right now. The settlement negotiation was short. The county attorney watched the video, once looked at the federal conviction rates for civil rights violations, and told the sheriff to open the checkbook. They settled for $450,000. It was a staggering amount for a small rural county. It meant no new cruisers for 2 years. It meant the road repair budget was slashed. The taxpayers were furious, not at Thorne, but at the sheriff's department. But the money wasn't the main point for Thorne. The consent decree was. As part of the settlement, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department was forced to overhaul its policies. Every deputy had to undergo 40 hours of constitutional policing training. Every stop had to be documented with a specific articulable reason. Dash cams and body cams could not be turned off. And Deputy Kyle Brannigan. He was terminated the day the settlement was signed. The official reason was conduct unbecoming an officer and violation of department policy. But it went further. The State Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission post opened a review. Based on the clear violation of civil rights caught on tape, they revoked Brannigan's certification. He would never be a police officer again. Not in that county, not in that state. Sheriff Reynolds survived the scandal barely, but he was forced to retire a year early. The department was under a microscope. 6 months later, Marcus Thorne returned to the area. He wasn't there to audit the substation this time. He was there to speak at a town hall meeting organized by local citizens concerned about police overreach. He stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. He saw farmers, teachers, mechanics. He saw black faces and white faces. "The Constitution," Thorne said into the microphone, "is not a suggestion. It is a shield. But a shield only works if you know how to hold it up. Deputy Brannigan didn't just violate my rights because he was a bad apple. He did it because he thought he could. He thought his power was absolute. But in this country, no one is above the law. Not the president, and certainly not a deputy on a power trip." The room was quiet. Thorne continued. "I had a badge in my pocket. I had the resources to fight back. But I ask you to think about the man or woman who doesn't. The college student driving home. The single mother working 2 jobs. When they get stopped, when they get bullied, who speaks for them? We do. We have to. Accountability isn't something that is given to us by the government. It is something we must demand every single day." Thorne left the stage to a standing ovation. He drove past the substation on his way out of town. The dust was still there. The wires still hummed. But there was a new sign on the fence, bright and reflective. No trespassing. Surveillance in use. And parked down the road observing the traffic was a sheriff's cruiser. Thorne slowed down. The deputy inside gave him a wave. It wasn't Brannigan. It was a new officer, young, maybe fresh out of the academy. Thorne waved back. The system had worked this time. But it had worked because the victim was the perfect victim. It was a victory, yes, but a sobering one. It reminded Thorne that for every case like his that ended in justice, there were 1,000 that ended in a plea deal and a ruined life. He merged onto the highway, the sun setting in his rearview mirror. The road ahead was long, and there was still so much work to do. Now, I want you to take a moment and really think about this story. Marcus Thorne had a federal badge, top secret clearance, and video evidence, and he still ended up in handcuffs. What does that tell you about how fragile our rights really are? If this story made you angry, or if it made you think, share it with someone. Send it to a friend, a family member, or post it on your timeline. We need to keep talking about this. And before you go, let me ask you one final question. If Marcus Thorne had been a regular civilian without a federal badge, do you think he ever would have gotten justice? Or would he still be sitting in a cell? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. Stay safe out there and know your rights.
Drop it! Now! Step away from the vehicle!
Officer, it's a lug wrench. I'm changing a tire. You complying?
Turn around! Hands on the hood! Don't reach for anything!
You're escalating without cause. Run the plate. It's federal.
Shut up! You're detained! Resisting and impersonating!
The high-definition dash cam mounted on the windshield of the cruiser was recording in 4K resolution, capturing every heat wave rising off the asphalt of Interstate 95. It was 1:15 in the afternoon, the sun was punishing, and the humidity was thick enough to wear like a coat. Officer Kyle Brannigan, 28 years old and just 4 years out of the academy, didn't know that the man he was speeding toward was not a criminal, nor was he a stranded motorist in need of a tow truck. The man wiping sweat from his brow with a silk handkerchief was Marcus Sterling, the 58-year-old regional administrator for the Federal Highway Administration. Marcus had spent the last 30 years of his life drafting the very safety protocols that governed the roads beneath his feet. He had testified before Congress on infrastructure stability. He managed a budget that exceeded the GDP of some small nations, and at this precise moment he was simply trying to change a flat tire on his government-issued Chevrolet Tahoe. The Tahoe was parked perfectly on the shoulder, well outside the white fog line, exactly as the Department of Transportation safety manuals that Marcus had helped edit dictated. He had engaged his hazard lights. He had placed a reflective safety triangle 50 feet behind the vehicle. He was wearing a high-visibility vest over his charcoal gray suit, a vest he kept in the emergency kit for exactly these situations. Marcus was a man of procedure. He believed in rules because rules saved lives. He was currently kneeling by the rear passenger tire, loosening the lug nuts with a tire iron, his movements methodical and efficient despite the oppressive heat. He checked his watch. If he hurried, he would only be 15 minutes late for his inspection meeting with the state engineers. When he saw the flashing red and blue lights reflect off the polished chrome of his bumper, Marcus felt a brief surge of relief. A highway patrol unit could block traffic, providing a safety buffer while he finished the job. It was standard procedure for officers to assist stranded motorists on federal interstates, especially in dangerous heat. Marcus stood up, dusting off the knees of his suit trousers, and prepared to greet the officer. He expected a nod, perhaps an offer to call a service truck, or at the very least a safety escort. He did not expect the aggressive screech of tires as the cruiser pulled up at an angle, cutting off his potential exit path. He did not expect the door to fly open before the car had fully settled on its suspension. And he certainly did not expect the hand resting purposefully on the grip of a service weapon. Officer Brannigan stepped out of the air-conditioned sanctuary of his cruiser into the heavy afternoon air. He adjusted his sunglasses and immediately sized up the situation through a lens of bias that he didn't even realize he possessed. He didn't see a government official with a G-plate vehicle. He didn't see a safety triangle. He saw a large black man holding a heavy metal object on the side of the highway. Brannigan had been on patrol since 6:00 a.m. He was tired, he was hot, and his numbers for the month were low. He needed an arrest or at least a significant citation to get the lieutenant off his back. In his mind, a luxury SUV, even a domestic one, stopped on the highway often meant one of two things, a breakdown or a drop-off. And Brannigan decided without a shred of evidence to treat this as a felony stop. "Drop the weapon," Brannigan shouted, his voice cracking slightly over the roar of passing semi-trucks. He stood behind his open door, using it as cover. Marcus blinked, confused. He looked at the tire iron in his hand, then back at the officer. He lowered the tool slowly to his side, keeping his movements deliberate. "Officer, this is a lug wrench. I have a flat tire." "I said drop it. Now put it on the ground and step away from the vehicle." Brannigan's hand tightened on his holster. He wasn't drawing yet, but the threat was implicit and heavy. Marcus Sterling had navigated the treacherous waters of Washington, D.C. politics for decades. He knew how to handle aggressive senators and hostile contractors. He took a deep breath, channeling that same professional calm. He bent at the knees, keeping his back straight and hands visible, and placed the tire iron gently on the asphalt. He then took 2 steps back, raising his hands to shoulder height, palms open. "I am complying, officer," Marcus said, his voice projecting clearly over the traffic noise. "I am Marcus Sterling, a federal official with the Department of Transportation. This is a government vehicle. I experienced a blowout at mile marker 142, and I am effecting a repair." Brannigan didn't hear federal official. He didn't hear government vehicle. All he heard was a suspect talking back, trying to control the interaction. Brannigan stepped out from behind his door, walking onto the shoulder with a swagger that masked his insecurity. He was the authority here. He was the law, and he didn't like being lectured by a man in a vest. "I didn't ask for your life story." Brannigan snapped, closing the distance between them. I asked you to step away. Keep your hands where I can see them. Why is this vehicle unmarked? It is not unmarked, Marcus corrected gently, nodding toward the rear bumper. It bears a U.S. government license plate, G14998. If you run the tag, it will come back to the General Services Administration assigned to the Federal Highway Administration. Brannigan glanced at the plate but didn't radio it in. He didn't want to be wrong. He wanted to find something. Looks like a fake plate to me, Brannigan sneered. We've had reports of traffickers using fake government tags to move product up the I-95 corridor. You match the description. There was no report. There was no description. It was a fabrication, a ghostly justification conjured up in the heat of the moment to validate his hostility. Marcus knew it immediately. He knew the stats on trafficking interdictions. He read the reports weekly. He knew that the likelihood of a trafficker stopping to change a tire in broad daylight while wearing a high-visibility vest was statistically 0. Officer, Marcus set his tone, dropping an octave, becoming the voice that silenced boardrooms. I am going to reach into my breast pocket to retrieve my federal credentials. My wallet is in my jacket. I am telling you this before I move so that there is no misunderstanding. Don't you move, Brannigan yelled, his hand finally pulling the weapon from its holster, pointing it at the ground but ready to raise. You reach for anything, and this goes bad for you. Turn around, face the vehicle. Hands on the roof, now. Marcus stared at the young man. He saw the sweat on Brannigan's upper lip, the shaking of his hands, the erratic breathing. Marcus realized with a cold dread that he was in more danger now than he had ever been in a war zone. This wasn't just a rude cop. This was a frightened, incompetent man with lethal power. And that was the most dangerous combination on Earth. Marcus turned slowly. He felt the heat of the car's metal roof against his palms. The paint was scorching. I am complying, he repeated. But you are making a grave mistake, son. I am asking you to pause and look at the license plate. Run the tag. Follow your procedure. Shut up, Brannigan hissed, holstering his weapon now that Marcus was in a disadvantageous position. He pulled his handcuffs from his belt. You're detained for investigation of a stolen vehicle and resisting an officer. Resisting? Marcus asked, his cheek pressed against the hot metal as Brannigan kicked his legs apart. I have followed every instruction you have given. I have identified myself. I have identified the vehicle. You're running your mouth. That's resisting, Brannigan said. He grabbed Marcus's left wrist and twisted it behind his back with unnecessary force. A sharp pain shot up Marcus's shoulder, a rotator cuff injury from his college football days flaring up instantly. Officer, I have a mobility issue in that shoulder. Marcus grimaced. Please, there is no need for force. I am a federal administrator. Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England, Brannigan muttered, slapping the second cuff onto Marcus's right wrist and ratcheting them tight. Too tight. The metal bit into the skin, pinching a nerve. You got ID, or did you leave it in your other government car? It is in my left breast pocket, Marcus said through gritted teeth. As I told you. Brannigan reached into the expensive suit jacket. He felt the silk lining the quality of the fabric. He pulled out a slim leather wallet. He flipped it open. Inside was a badge. A heavy gold badge with the eagle and shield of the United States and a laminated ID card identifying Marcus Sterling as Regional Administrator Level 4 security clearance. For a second, Brannigan hesitated. He looked at the photo, then at the back of Marcus's head. But the cognitive dissonance was too strong. His brain refused to accept that he had just assaulted a high-ranking federal official. It was easier to believe the lie than to accept the terrifying truth. Nice prop, Brannigan scoffed, tossing the wallet onto the hood of the Tahoe. You can buy these online for $50. Nice try, buddy. You're going for impersonating a federal officer, too. That's a felony. Marcus closed his eyes. He inhaled the smell of gasoline and asphalt. He was calculating. He was memorizing. Time, 1:22 p.m. Location, I-95. North mile marker, 142. Officer name, Brannigan K Patrol Unit, number 409. Officer Brannigan. Marcus said, his voice terrifyingly calm. You are currently in violation of Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. Deprivation of rights under color of law. You have also violated the Fourth Amendment by seizing my person without reasonable suspicion or probable cause. The tag on this vehicle is federal property. By abandoning it on the side of the road unlocked, you are also negligent in the protection of government assets. Brannigan stiffened. Suspects didn't quote Title 18. Suspects didn't talk about government assets. I said shut up. Brannigan grabbed Marcus by the arm and hauled him away from the SUV. You're going for a ride. My vehicle, Marcus said, stumbling slightly as he was dragged toward the cruiser. You cannot leave a federal vehicle unsecured with sensitive documents inside. Protocol dictates you must wait for a tow or secure the vehicle. I'll call a tow when I'm good and ready, Brannigan said, opening the back door of his cruiser. The interior smelled of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and old sweat. Get in. Marcus had to bend awkwardly to fit his large frame into the cramped back seat. His suit jacket bunched up, the cuffs dug into his wrists, and his dignity was being stripped away layer by layer. Brannigan slammed the door shut, sealing Marcus in the cage. The air conditioning in the back was weak, barely cutting through the trapped heat. Outside, traffic had slowed. People were watching. A woman in a sedan held up her phone recording as she drove by slowly. Marcus looked directly at her lens. He didn't look away. He wanted her to see. He wanted the world to see. Brannigan walked back to the Tahoe. He didn't search it. He didn't lock it. He didn't put out flares. He just grabbed Marcus's wallet from the hood and shoved it into his own pocket. He walked back to his cruiser, got in the front seat, and radioed dispatch. Dispatch Unit 409, one in custody. Suspicious person, possible stolen vehicle impersonation, en route to station. Copy 409, the dispatcher crackled. You need a tow for the vehicle. Yeah, send one out to MM-142, Black Tahoe. No rush. No rush. Marcus sat in the back, sweat trickling down his temple. He closed his eyes and began to compose the opening paragraph of his federal lawsuit in his head. The drive to the station took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of silence from the front seat. 20 minutes of Brannigan nervously tapping the steering wheel, perhaps starting to wonder if the badge felt a little too heavy to be fake, if the suit felt a little too real. But it was too late to turn back. He had committed. When they arrived at the precinct, Brannigan pulled into the sally port. The garage door rumbled shut, cutting off the sunlight. Let's go, Brannigan said, opening the back door. He grabbed Marcus's arm again, hauling him out. Marcus's legs were stiff. My cuffs are excessively tight, Marcus stated. I am requesting you loosen them immediately. You can wait until processing, Brannigan said, pushing him toward the intake door. They walked into the booking area. It was a bustle of activity. Phones ringing, officers typing reports, the hum of fluorescent lights. At the main desk sat Sergeant Thomas O'Malley. O'Malley was 55, a veteran with 30 years on the force. He had weary eyes and a mustache that had gone gray a decade ago. He was drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup and reviewing a shift schedule. He looked up as Brannigan entered with his prisoner. O'Malley's eyes scanned the scene. He saw Brannigan looking flushed and overly aggressive. Then he looked at the prisoner. He saw the Italian leather shoes. He saw the bespoke tailoring of the charcoal suit. He saw the high-visibility vest that still bore the logo, DOT, Federal Highway Administration. And then he looked at the face. O'Malley froze. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He squinted. He had seen that face on the news just last week discussing the new interstate bridge project. He had seen that face at the mayor's gala last year, sitting at the head table. "Brannigan," O'Malley said, his voice low and dangerous. "Bring him here." "Got a live one, Sarge," Brannigan bragged, trying to sound confident. "Impersonating a Fed. Fake badge. Stolen vehicle out on I-95. Resisting arrest." O'Malley stood up slowly. He walked around the desk. He didn't look at Brannigan. He looked at Marcus. "Sir," O'Malley said to Marcus, "I need to ask you a question, and I need you to answer me honestly." "I have been nothing but honest, Sergeant," Marcus replied, his posture erect despite the handcuffs. "My name is Marcus Sterling. I am the regional administrator for the FHWA." O'Malley closed his eyes for a brief second, as if praying that this was a nightmare he would wake up from. He opened them and turned to Brannigan. "Where is his property? Where is the fake badge?" Brannigan patted his pocket and pulled out the wallet. He handed it to O'Malley with a smirk. "Check it out. Looks real right, but the guy was changing a tire. Feds don't change their own tires." O'Malley snatched the wallet. He opened it. He felt the weight of the badge. He slid the ID card out and held it up to the light, checking the holographic seal, the microprinting that was impossible to forge. He looked at the back of the card, at the magnetic strip and the chip. O'Malley's face went pale. He looked at Brannigan with an expression of absolute disbelief, mixed with fury. "You idiot," O'Malley whispered. Then he roared, "You absolute moron." The entire booking room went silent. Officers stopped typing. The hum of conversation died instantly. "Unlock him," O'Malley barked, pointing at Marcus. "Unlock him right now." "Sarge, he was resisting," Brannigan started to protest. "Unlock him before I rip those keys out of your hand and do it myself," O'Malley shouted, stepping into Brannigan's personal space. "Do you know who this is? This is the man who signs the checks for the roads you drive on. This isn't a fake ID, you incompetent fool. This is a federal credential." Brannigan's hands started to shake. The reality crashed down on him like a collapsing building. The suit, the car, the confidence. It wasn't an act. He fumbled with the keys. It took him 3 tries to get the key into the handcuffs. When the mechanism clicked open, Marcus rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had cut into his skin. "Mr. Sterling," O'Malley said, his voice trembling slightly. I cannot express how sorry I am. There has been a terrible mistake." Marcus adjusted his cuffs. He straightened his tie. He looked at Brannigan, who was now shrinking back against the wall, looking like a child who had broken a priceless vase. "It was not a mistake, Sergeant," Marcus said coolly. "A mistake is a clerical error. A mistake is a wrong turn. This was a calculated series of civil rights violations, abuse of power, and a felony deprivation of liberty. I was kidnapped from the side of a federal highway." I thought," Brannigan stammered. "You didn't think," Marcus cut him off. "That is the problem. You assumed, you profiled, and you acted on bias instead of fact." "I want the chief down here," Marcus said, turning to O'Malley. "And I want the city attorney. And I want a medical examiner to document these injuries to my wrists. And I want the dash cam footage secured immediately. If 1 second of that video goes missing, I will bring the full weight of the Department of Justice down on this precinct." "We will secure everything, sir," O'Malley said, reaching for the phone. "I'm calling the chief now. Please come into my office. Let me get you some water. Let me get you a chair." "I will stand," Marcus said. "I want to stand right here where everyone can see me. And I want Officer Brannigan to stand right there where I can see him." 20 minutes later, the police chief burst through the doors, tie askew, breathless. He took one look at Marcus Sterling, a man he had shaken hands with at a ribbon-cutting ceremony 2 months ago, and looked as if he might be sick. "Mr. Administrator," the chief began. "I am horrified. I am—" "Save it, Chief," Marcus said. "I am not interested in apologies. I am interested in procedure. I want a copy of the arrest report. I want a copy of the dispatch logs. And I want to know why this officer," he pointed a steady finger at Brannigan, "has a badge. We will launch a full internal investigation immediately," the chief promised. "You will?" Marcus nodded. "But so will my office, and so will the FBI, because when you arrest a federal official on false charges, it becomes a federal matter." Marcus left the station an hour later. He did not take a ride from the police. He called his own driver. As he waited on the steps of the precinct, his wrists throbbing, he checked his phone. The video from the woman on the highway had already been posted. It had 40,000 views. The title was, "Cop Arrests Black Man in Suit Changing Tire." By the next morning, the video had 4 million views. The narrative had shifted from a local incident to a national scandal. The visual was too perfect, too damning. The juxtaposition of Marcus's calm demeanor and Brannigan's frantic aggression was undeniable. Marcus filed his lawsuit on Monday morning. It was not a simple complaint. It was a 40-page indictment of the department's training, hiring, and supervision practices. It detailed every statute Brannigan had violated. It cited case law that Brannigan had likely never read. The internal affairs investigation was swift, fueled by the terrifying pressure of national media attention. They pulled Brannigan's history. It was a treasure trove of bias. In his 4 years, Brannigan had stopped black motorists at a rate 3 times higher than the department average. He had a history of insubordination complaints from citizens that had been dismissed by previous supervisors. He had a pattern of escalating minor traffic stops into searches. But he had never stopped someone who knew the rules better than he did. That was his fatal error. The city council held an emergency meeting. The mayor, desperate to save his own career, threw the police department under the bus. "Zero tolerance," he told the press. 6 weeks after the incident, Kyle Brannigan sat across from the review board. He looked smaller now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen resentment. He tried to argue that he was just following his training, that he felt threatened. "Threatened by a lug wrench?" the board chairman asked. "Held by a man in a 3-piece suit who identified himself immediately." "He was arrogant," Brannigan muttered. "He was superior to you," the chairman corrected. "In rank, in conduct, and in knowledge of the law. And you couldn't handle that." Brannigan was terminated effective immediately. The state revocation board stripped him of his peace officer certification permanently. He would never wear a badge again. He would never carry a gun for the state again. The settlement came 3 months later. The city didn't want to go to trial. They knew a jury would destroy them. They offered $4.5 million. Marcus accepted. But Marcus Sterling didn't buy a boat. He didn't buy a vacation home. He took the check and he started the Sterling Justice Initiative. He created a scholarship fund for the children of people who had been wrongfully arrested or incarcerated. He funded a legal clinic that provided free representation for motorists stopped on that specific stretch of I-95. And he went back to work. A year later, Marcus stood at a podium at the FHWA headquarters. He was announcing a new federal guideline for highway safety interactions. It was called the Brannigan Protocol, named ironically after the man who had tried to humiliate him. The protocol mandated de-escalation techniques for non-moving vehicle assistance. It required officers to verify government plates before initiating contact. It required respect. Marcus looked out at the audience of reporters and engineers. He looked tired but strong. "We build roads to connect people," Marcus said into the microphone. "That is our job. But a road is only as safe as the people who patrol it. We cannot have a system where a flat tire is a death sentence or a jail sentence depending on the color of the driver's skin. I was lucky. I had a title. I had a badge. I had the resources to fight. But what about the teacher, the nurse, the student? They don't have my badge, so we must be their shield." The story of Marcus Sterling isn't just about a bad cop getting fired. It's about the terrifying reality that even doing everything right, being successful, being lawful, being respectful, isn't always enough to protect you from bias. It's a reminder that authority without accountability is just tyranny. Marcus still drives that Tahoe. He still inspects the roads. But now, when he sees a police car in his rearview mirror, he doesn't feel relief. He feels the phantom weight of handcuffs on his wrists. And he remembers that justice is not a guarantee. It is a constant, exhausting battle. What do you think was the $4.5 million settlement enough for the humiliation Marcus endured? Or should the supervisors who ignored Brannigan's pattern of behavior for years also have lost their jobs? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe that no one is above the law, especially those who enforce it, please hit that subscribe button. We need to keep telling these stories until we don't have to anymore. Stay safe out there.